When Silent Hill F was first announced, many would be intrigued by what an all-new Silent Hill game, after all this time, would bring, especially once the teaser itself was released, bringing further interest as it would reveal that it wouldn't actually be set in the series' namesake. Instead, the game takes place in Japan, specifically 1960s rural Japan, in a small quiet town named Ebisuguoka, as we experience it through the eyes of one Hinako Shimizu, a high schooler with a troubled personal life. Already in terms of location and time period, it is a notable contrast from a majority of the prior titles, which scratch the heads of many players familiar with Silent Hill. Many intrigued gamers would ask exactly what does this game have that, despite all these deviations from previous entries, to also stand alongside them? What makes Silent Hill F, well, Silent Hill? As it turns out, the connections are there, but it may not be what you think of immediately. Now, what most folks would cite as the answer as to what makes this game belong under Silent Hill would be its inclusion of the White Claudia, albeit indirectly. Introduced in the series' debut entry, it's one particular herb long consumed by the Order, the cult that operated within Silent Hill. Playing an important role within mainly the first and third games, a highly concentrated form of White Claudia, called the Aglafatis, functions as a plot device for those entries. Within the context of Silent Hill F, White Claudia is not directly referred to as such, but it is strongly implied. As the first ending of the game reveals, the effects depicted line up with what we've known about the herb in particular, which were mainly the plant's hallucinogenic abilities, and as the aforementioned ending implies, harkens back to a specific quote from Silent Hill 3.
Are you talking about the monsters?
Monsters? They looked like monsters to you?
Oh no. ちょっと、どうしたのよ。
これは何の真似だ。おい、貴様、正気か。
うるさい。どいて。
For all the plant imagery present overall, that one interesting white herb can only be found in a body of water behind the home of Shu, Hinako's closest childhood friend. It's worthwhile to mention, as it's established early on, that he was the supplier to Hinako's painkillers due to her frequent headaches, and the full significance of this fact isn't really revealed until that particular ending. So it goes, although Shu has a background of being part of a family of physicians, I don't think he would have anticipated Hinako having these kinds of side effects. Despite all of that, I feel that the connection from Silent Hill F to the others isn't only limited to something like the inclusion of an important plot device from previous games being indirectly referenced. Well, we can't forget the return of Akira Yamaoka too, whose presence is always welcome. Be that as it may, there really is more than just surface lore references and music cues that ultimately tie the game to its predecessors. In fact, once you view the game through more of a thematic perspective, you'd find that Silent Hill F does share a lot of common ground with what came before. It's likely among one of the better Silent Hill games since those original Team Silent entries as a result. I'd credit this to the attitude of the development studio, Neobards Entertainment, and their philosophy in building Silent Hill F. One can imagine it was also a challenge for them as well, that after confirming what direction they wanted to go for with the game, just how much of a balancing act it was to incorporate what made this series so iconic in the first place. And that's something we really focused on, because we knew that we're not Team Silent, as Silent Hill F's game director, Al Yang, had stated during an interview. He continues, "We're not going to be able to write or create a game that hits their exact style. Neither should we emulate it, but we should kind of go out in our own directions." Previous attempts at establishing a new direction for Silent Hill have proven to be spotty, to say the least. Especially if you consider the fact that Silent Hill 2 remains one of the most standalone entries in the series as time goes on, and yet is arguably the most celebrated. On the other hand, however, entries like Homecoming, or even the more recent The Short Message, just show how delicate that balance is. It's evident that it's really not as simple as throwing players in a spooky, rusty hallway with Pyramid Head just showing up for no reason. No, there's more to Silent Hill than that, and Neobards did appear to keep that in mind when working on the game. There's many factors during development that ultimately affect the final product, and Silent Hill's track record of interference is no joke. keeping in mind instances like the harsher treatment of Team Silent even during the first game's production, or that whole PT fiasco with Hideo Kojima. It's safe to say that overall, Silent Hill definitely has not been treated well. Hence, it does feel refreshing that this time around with Silent Hill F, it appears more attention was held in not only living up to series expectations for the fans, but still providing a new take on them to keep the series fresh after such a long period of dormancy. We'll discuss two distinctive ways in which Silent Hill F's deviations from the norm might actually be closer to the norm than originally thought. And there's plenty more connections out there, enough for a second part even, so if you are interested in a more in-depth look, let me know in the comments down below. Let's start off with taking a look at our lead character herself. It's evident early on that Hinako shares character traits with previous protagonists. For instance, personality-wise, much is noted from her own friends about her tomboyish nature, which parallels Silent Hill 3's Heather Mason.
Oh, really?
Hinako's creation was partially influenced by one recurring theme in the series, as the game's writer Ryukishi07 noticed,
生まれた時から黒目な目に遭っている女性が多かったんで、ただ不幸な目に遭ってるだけではなく、その不幸な中でも自分なりの選択を葛藤しながら選べるような、流されるんじゃなくて自分の意思で答えを見つけれるような主人公あるいは物語にしたいなという思いはありました。
Honestly, it is a fair assessment to have about the series, as many of its female characters really are put through a lot. Sorry, Alessa. Now, I'm not personally familiar with Ryukishi07's other games, but what I can at least gather by a quick Google search, the guy is no stranger at all to writing female protagonists going through it.
New family bonds have been forged as a result of these games.
So it was a no-brainer to have him at the helm for a story like this, as Hinako surely endures a great deal of suffering through the story, often as a consequence of her own decisions. Sorry, Hinako. Plus, you can say with that sentiment, she even shares a bit with Silent Hill 2's own James Sunderland. Both of their respective entries in the series happen to hinge more on the protagonist being an unreliable narrator. It brings to mind how in Silent Hill 2, the revelation of James' wife ultimately recontextualizes the entire narrative of the game up to that point. Following this, you see James in this situation in a different light overall. It's executed so hauntingly, and I believe this is partly why the game is so memorable in displaying the ultimate tragedy and sadness of what happened. Silent Hill F was able to capture that essence and really expand on it with its new Game Plus mode. As with each consecutive run in this game, more new items and cutscenes are included that give more to the overall story. This allows for more depth in the narrative, as a lot of it isn't outright stated, but the weight of those discoveries are still felt by the player in the end. While I find many folks online aren't a fan of the game because of the first ending, the other endings you can unlock through completing certain tasks in New Game Plus, I think overall round the story out. I say this as my perception of Hinako really has grown to something more akin to a Laura Palmer figure. I mean that as in both literally endured tragic family and social lives, and that sense of tragedy even extended to their fates as well. It's interesting to point this out, as Twin Peaks, or just David Lynch in general, are a well-established influence on Silent Hill. So you can use this as another piece of evidence pointing to just how connected in DNA this title really is. Now, while such a point is often being made of the game not being set physically within Silent Hill at all, that's not to say that was entirely a first for the series. Silent Hill 3, for example, doesn't have Heather enter the town until much later on in the game. Later titles like Downpour would also do the same. But Silent Hill 4 is particularly egregious in terms of the fact that it takes place primarily in the titular room the entire game. So, not Silent Hill, but instead, Ashfield? Ironically, it's Team Silent's final entry for the franchise itself that would introduce the theme that maybe while the physical town called Silent Hill isn't in the game, there are the ingredients that keep it a Silent Hill game. Double irony in the fact that this game itself was not initially developed as a Silent Hill title either. This may be likely part of the reason why out of the original 4, the room is often seen as the black sheep. I bring it up here as it shows even then, there's precedence for this kind of thing in the series. Yet with Silent Hill F, it's seemingly one of the prominent points of discussion. So to jump back to that game, it's less important that it's not set in the namesake town at all. What's more interesting is the particular reasoning as to why, instead of rehashing perhaps another neighboring American town, Silent Hill F opted for a rural Japanese village instead. It was during an interview at Gamescom 2025 that Al Yang would go on to explain the decision as partly influenced by another recurring theme throughout the series.
So something that Silent Hill series has always been about is that kind of feeling of tension and unfamiliarity. So with Silent Hill F setting in Japan, and actually in Showa era Japan in 1960s, and I like to always use this phrase, which is it's foreign yet familiar.
Evidently, that harsh contrast was by intent. This angle the developers went for, I find a fascinating observation to be made in context with the rest of the franchise.
サイレントヒルは和風ホラーのエッセンスと西洋ホラーのエッセンスを融合して生み出されてきた作品だと思います。ただシリーズは長らく西洋を舞台にしてきたんですけど、日本的なエッセンスが徐々に失われていったっていうふうに感じていまして、そこで逆に和風ホラーのエッセンスを 100% にした作品を作ってみたいという気持ちが生まれてきたんです。
After all, the series started out being done by a fully Japanese team, forming a pastiche of Americana through pop culture. This is why we have the school from Kindergarten Cop in the original Silent Hill. And as a result of that hodgepodge of influence, the town as it is depicted is, well, foreign yet familiar. The choice of Japan itself this time around, along with the particular decade depicted, is a clever twist.
これが実はサイレントヒルらしさじゃないですけど、一つのポイントにもなってて、西洋舞台にしながらも日本のエッセンスっていうなかなかなんですかね、なかなかもう個性的なというか、これが個性にもなってると思うんで。
On top of the time period, which is the 1960s, where you might have seen like a rotary phone before or like an old style car, but you've never actually maybe experienced that before in real life. So it adds that kind of extra layer of unfamiliarity, so it feels a little bit foreign yet familiar to the players.
It's easy for us here to play something like Persona 5, for example, and while walking around Shibuya, for me, it reminds me of something like Times Square, right? Like in terms of its atmosphere. It's easy to find little connections like that and have that frame my understanding when playing. However, Silent Hill F's conscious decision to go away from that and instead focus on a quieter, rural village stokes intrigue due to that lack of innate parallel. Again, at least under the perspective of a Western audience. America does have lots of smaller, quieter towns that perhaps don't get the spotlight as often, but I mean, that was already represented in the original Silent Hill games. For many, even here in the States, that's never traversed out of their own city, that was their foreign yet familiar. The time period as well is an interesting choice, as being set in the 60s shows a particular side of Japan that I feel many aren't really familiar with. At least in my perspective, again, as part of a Western audience, it feels more common to have that perception of that tech-forward side of Japan. You know, high-tech everyday gadgetry, or hell, even in fiction, you know, mecha, for example, is such a large part of that as well. Yet, when playing the game and roaming the quiet streets of Ebisuguoka, I really felt personally entranced at times, from just thinking how this scenery, these roads, this type of environment really was how a lot of people lived back then. I enjoyed the extra details that were done to really make the setting feel much more immersive, and I believe the developers did a good job in not only letting you feel like you're stuck here as much as Hinako, but that you feel for her own disillusionment. As per classic Silent Hill fashion, the environments begin to reflect her internal conflict throughout the game. Of course, this also extends to the other areas in the game that are outside the village, which are no longer rusty hellscapes, but hauntingly beautiful traditional shrines. Since it's well within the framework of Silent Hill, it continues to evoke that same dread and terror as one would experience from prior games. While there are certainly aspects of the game that perhaps stray further than I'd like, the girl always takes me out. God, that's so ridiculous. It really didn't inhibit my overall experience purely because of it being so different. Otherwise, I think like most other games in the series, one of the weaker elements in this one, funnily enough, is still the combat, despite all the revamps to the mechanics putting such an emphasis on it. It's not particularly grating like what some online seem to feel, but I do find that in certain sections, the combat does get a bit repetitive or just annoying sometimes. But hey, you know what? I'll admit it. I'm not fancy to these types of controls, so this is probably more of a skill issue than anything. Regardless, the story and the atmosphere often triumph over the combat and the action in these titles anyway. All in all, much of Silent Hill F does still feel like Silent Hill in the end, because of the developers' intent to retain that spirit of the series. While different on the surface, underlying that, you can very much feel those themes from the other games when playing. This is all to say that Silent Hill F proves itself among one of the highlights of the franchise. If this is a peek at what the series is capable of now that it's back, then I'm greeting it with open arms. Thankfully, it appears that this time around, we won't have to be waiting too long for what's next. Tell me in the comments what you thought about Silent Hill F, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. Thank you so much for watching, and subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll catch you in the next one.